4YOU or BaptistJax.com.
On the next Radio Lab,
one of, if not the biggest butterfly poaching and smuggling rings in American history.
One man's journey to save a tiny little butterfly.
Florida, where the sun shines bright, but dark money hides in the shadows. I'm Melissa Ross, and just ahead this hour on First Coast Connect, a new investigation shows dark money may have been behind the push to privatize JEA. We'll explain then later.
Crowley's making this commitment because it's true to our core values and our purpose. It's a broad goal, it's a bold goal of reducing emissions across all three scopes, so scopes 1, 2, and 3. And the reason we're doing this, first and foremost, it's the right thing to do.
Shipping giant Crowley going net zero carbon emissions. That and more, all ahead. After the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. Rescuers in Kentucky are still trying to locate more than 100 people who are unaccounted for after Friday's deadly tornadoes. At least 74 people have been killed in that state. More people died in 4 other states after the spate of tornadoes blasted across the Midwest and South. Thousands are homeless. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas says weather disasters are a growing threat to Americans.
There used to be seasons for hurricanes and fires and the like, and quite frankly, that cadence has changed dramatically. It is now a year-long process of disaster response and recovery.
He spoke to NPR's Morning Edition. President Biden has declared major federal disasters in Kentucky, Illinois, and in Tennessee. The U.S. House of Representatives could vote today to refer criminal charges for former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. NPR's Claudia Grisales reports the charge against former President Donald Trump's ally comes after the panel investigating the Capitol insurrection voted to hold Mark Meadows in contempt of Congress.
House Select Committee member Liz Cheney read some of Meadows' text messages he did turn over before he stopped cooperating, including several from Donald Trump Jr.
He's got to condemn this ASAP. The Capitol Police tweet is not enough.
Trump Jr. also told Meadows that, quote, it has gone too far and gotten out of hand. Cheney also read messages from personalities from the Fox cable channel pleading with Meadows to get Trump to call off the violence. The House is expected to approve the contempt referral, sending it to the Justice Department to decide whether to prosecute. If so, Meadows could face a year in jail and fines. Claudia Grisales, NPR News, Washington.
The former chair of Harvard's chemistry department will stand trial in Boston starting today. He is accused of concealing his ties to the Chinese government. This case is being followed by American researchers as foreign funding, specifically from China, has come under increased scrutiny from the Justice Department. From member station GBH in Boston, Kirk Carapezza has more.
Nanotechnologist Charles Lieber was charged nearly 2 years ago with allegedly making false statements about research funding he received from the Chinese government. The Trump administration said at the time Lieber had signed a contract with a Chinese university and was paid up to $50,000 a month to set up a research lab. He did not report that income to Harvard or the IRS. Before Lieber pleaded not guilty, Harvard placed him on paid leave. The outcome of the jury trial could determine the fate of Chinese partnerships and exchanges with U.S. schools, which the Justice Department says China uses to steal cutting-edge research. For NPR News, I'm Kirk Carapezza in Boston.
This is NPR.
The time is now 9:04. This is WJCT News 89.9. Leon County Commissioner Rick Minor was among the elected officials on a county city board who voted against spending about $20 million for renovations to Florida State University's Doak Campbell Stadium. Minor was in the minority of commissioners on the Blueprint Intergovernmental Agency Board who voted against the project.
The economic benefits of having an upgraded stadium are very clear in my mind. They're significant. And we need to have FSU as a partner. They're a vital partner for this community. At the end of the day, though, I have to listen to the people I work for, and overwhelmingly, 25-1, they have voiced their opposition.
Miner says the issue wasn't about whether or not he's in favor of FSU's project. Instead, it was about whether this funding should be used on the stadium. 2 South Florida lawmakers want some roadside farm stands to be deemed tourist attractions with signs to help draw motorists. They filed bills in the State House and Senate that would establish a, quote, fresh from Florida roadside farm stand signage program and create an accompanying 12-member council within the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. That program would be limited to businesses that offer farm products at least 4 days a week, 10 months out of the year, and grow their products on site at least 2 acres of land and are open for tours. 65 degrees in St. Augustine now, 20% chance of rain later, partly sunny, near 69 degrees today.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include DuckDuckGo, a privacy company committed to making privacy online simple. Used by tens of millions, they offer private search and tracker blocking with one download. DuckDuckGo, privacy simplified.
Florida, where the sun shines bright, but dark money always hides in the shadows. Good morning. We're live from Studio 5. I'm Melissa Ross, and this is First Coast Connect. Thanks for listening. Just ahead this hour, we'll go inside a new investigation showing the role of dark money in the failed attempt to sell off JEA to a private utility. What are your questions? Give us a call, 549-2937. Then later, Crowley, the shipping giant in Jacksonville, says it's going net zero carbon emissions. How they plan to do it in our Going Green. That and more all ahead this morning, including how you can help those tornado victims in Kentucky. But first this hour, a new investigation by 2 Florida newspapers shows that a dark money group may have been way more involved in the push to privatize JEA than we ever knew at the time. Now, let's go back to the height of the controversy around JEA. By the way, that sparked a federal grand jury investigation that's still ongoing. But go back a few years in your mind to when all of that was at its height. At the time, City Council member Garrett Dennis received a mysterious and very lucrative job offer. Who was behind that and why has been documented in the Florida Times-Union in a new investigative piece reported in partnership with the Orlando Sentinel. And by the way, it turns out the dark money ties go beyond our JEA scandal in Jacksonville. They have ties to a bigger statewide scandal, too. Reporter and columnist Nate Monroe joins us with all the details. He's on the line. Hi, Nate.
Hi, Melissa.
Always good to talk to you. And here's our question to callers. What are your concerns about the role of dark money in Florida politics and how it may have been used in the now being investigated attempt to sell off JEA, which you, the voters, put a stop to, by the way? Give us a call about this. It's 549-2937. Emails to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Tweets to @MelissaInjax. And our Facebook page is open. Okay, Nate, before we get into what you've learned, let's first explain to people who really don't follow this closely what I mean when I say dark money. It's a scourge in Florida. And dark money is simply money that's contributed to a cause or candidate, and we don't know the source of the money. We don't know who's putting in the money. Under Florida law, people are legally allowed to do that. Let's begin with that.
Sure, and I would take that good definition and maybe just even say a step further that dark money is most often not only money that we can't track, but money in which the spenders have deliberately taken steps to obscure the origins of that money. You know, it's that there are people who strategize over how to conceal spending as much as possible, the origins of that spending, where the money came from. And that really is kind of the driver of this entire dark money investigation that the Sentinel and that we did in partnership.
Yeah, and dark money can be passed from committee to committee, from campaign to campaign, and you never know where it originated. It's been described as like trying to find the pea in the shell game. So the corruption of money in politics in Florida is extreme. We've known that for some time. What's new is that you, along with some journalists in Orlando, were able to get a hold of secret records that have given us new insight into that frenzied push to sell JEA a few years ago. Let's begin with what you write about first off in the Florida Times-Union this week. City Council member Garrett Dennis, a vocal opponent to selling off JEA, got a job offer in the middle of 2019, and it was a lot of money. Is that right?
Yes. I'm as much with salary and expenses included. I mean, nearly $250,000.
$250,000. That's a pretty nice salary. And what was the job he was offered?
So what's interesting is, so the Orlando Sentinel was sent anonymously a cache of documents that, after looking at them and kind of corroborating a lot of different detail that were in these documents, we can say with a high level of confidence that these are corporate records from a former consultant to Florida Power and Light, which is owned by NextEra, which submitted an $11 billion bid to purchase JEA. These records indicate that employees with that FPL consultant approached FPL with an idea to offer Garrett Dennis a job with an obscure organization called Grow United, to have him be an advocate for legalizing marijuana. And the idea was that he'd be traveling around the country. He'd make this really lucrative, he'd have a really nice salary, and he would have to leave the city council. And the documents we have specifically tie Garrett Dennis's, pretty well-known and vocal opposition to privatizing JEA to the desire to get him off the city council. And so Garrett Dennis's own memory of this, of a friend calling him and floating him this job, aligns remarkably with the details in those records. He recalled that he was told he would be offered a job with a group, that the job would pay about $250,000 a year, and it was for advocating for medical marijuana, and that he would have to leave the city council. He did not know until I interviewed him that this had anything to do with JEA or with NextEra.
Yeah, he didn't make the connection at the time. Okay. Now, for the record, you write that Florida Power and Light confirmed in a statement to you and the Orlando Sentinel that their consultant firm Matrix did come up with the idea of offering Garrett Dennis a job advocating for medical marijuana, but that it was flatly rejected. The owner of the consulting firm Matrix said if this were done, it was done by, in his words, rogue employees. So in other words, Florida Power and Light and their parent company that tried and failed to buy off JEA and make it a private investor-owned utility, they acknowledge some connection to this attempt to co-opt or sideline council member Garrett Dennis to get him off the city council, theoretically, so that he wouldn't vote down a JEA sale. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yes. I mean, they acknowledged to us in writing on the record that this was an idea that their former consulting firm, Matrix, offered to them. They also confirmed that Matrix was a consultant they worked with on privatization issues, which is not something that has ever come to light before. NextEra, in fact, specifically in response to a city council issued subpoena, listed the firms that they said they had worked with on the invitation to negotiate to buy JEA. Matrix was not on that list. The whole thing was really a huge revelation in a lot of different ways. And, I tell you, I did not, 2 weeks ago, I would have told you that I didn't think there was much else for us to find on the JEA sale. And so I was, really just as shocked as anyone to see some of this stuff.
If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Nate Monroe of the Florida Times-Union. A new investigation shows just how far some players in Florida were willing to go to privatize JEA. What are your questions about dark money in Florida politics? We'll go to your calls in a moment. Call us up now. The number, 549-2937. Already getting your tweets. Here's one from a listener. All of this smells like bribery. Here's a tweet from Ann. My only question is, when will the indictments be handed down? There is an active federal grand jury investigation still ongoing, Nate, looking into this whole mess. We'll talk about that in a moment. But first, let me ask you, your reporting finds that the dark money around privatizing JEA is tied to a much bigger story, a bigger statewide Florida story. Spoiler candidates were propped up by dark money groups in this state to try to manipulate 3 state Senate races, District 9 in Central Florida and Districts 37 and 39 in South Florida. The idea was to put in these fake or ghost candidates, they weren't real candidates, in order to hurt the Democratic candidates for state Senate and help Republicans in Florida keep control of the 40-member Florida Senate. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the JEA privatization, dark money efforts are tied into that elections controversy?
Absolutely. And I think this will also help give listeners a sense when we talk about dark money of what exactly is going on. So one of the big revelations in these documents is that Matrix, Florida Power & Light's former consultant, that employees there had actually set up a number of different groups over the years. Some of them are political committees, but some of them are 501c4 nonprofit social welfare organizations that had sort of titular purposes on paper. Grow United being one, that Grow United's stated purpose was to advocate for medical marijuana or legalized marijuana. But in truth, these documents allege the true purpose of creating a group like Grow United was so that it could solicit donations from clients like Florida Power & Light and then deploy that money for political purposes in campaigns. And Grow United money was, in fact, used in all 3 of those state Senate races to prop up these spoiler candidates. Grow United was also the group that Matrix employees discussed finding a job for Garrett Dennis. So there is sort of a remarkable series of connections there that really span from Miami all the way up to Jacksonville.
Yeah, it gives you a sense of just how deep the corruption goes. Nate, we often hear Florida described as a sunny place for shady people. But dark money is a scourge in politics all over this country. But how does Florida compare to other states, do you think, when we look at this problem of dark money manipulating the minds of voters, trying to put their thumb on the scale when it comes to really important civic decisions like the fate of this city's utility, all kinds of other matters? How bad is Florida when we look at it compared to other states?
So I will have to confess that I'm not an expert in the way that most other states handle campaign finance issues. However, I will say that Florida, we hear a lot about Citizens United, which was this, Supreme Court decision that vastly opened the door for sort of dark money to play in federal elections. The thing that I don't know that a lot of Floridians realize, we have a state-level version of Citizens United at work here. And in some ways, Florida is actually even more lax about big money than federal campaigns are. Florida, for example, allows campaigns to directly coordinate their activities with political committees, which can receive contributions in unlimited amounts from donors, and that often are recipients of this kind of dark money where it's, these committees can shuffle money back and forth without even using this kind of 501c4 scheme that we see in these matrix documents. I mean, you can obscure the origins of money just through the normal legal political fundraising process in Florida. So, I mean, we have a Wild West style landscape when it comes to campaign finance. And I just think it's fair to believe that it encourages these kinds of shenanigans.
It's 549-2937. We are seeing the hidden hand of dark money in this local city council runoff race between Republican Nick Howland and Democrat Tracy Polson. Nick Howland is getting money from dark money PACs where it's difficult to trace the original source of the money, but often these are pass-through funds that get passed around through various Republican-oriented PACs and committees. He has countered by accusing his opponent, Tracy Polson, of having to be a self-funded candidate and that she's spending inordinate amounts of her own money on this race. Just wanted to mention that that's another example of dark money affecting our politics. Here's an email from Ricardo. He says, "This goes beyond dark money. This is straight up attempting to bribe a public official. The entire JEA privatization stinks and should take down a huge swath of local and state Republicans. Let's hope the federal Justice Department, the FBI, and the courts go after these criminals as seriously as they went after Corrine Brown or Alcee Hastings, two black Democrats that held public office. Lest we start to think corruption is only enforced against black politician, corruption charges, he means to say." Okay, Nate Monroe, let's talk about this federal grand jury looking into all the shenanigans around selling off JEA. That email from that listener, I think, gives voice to a narrative that's developed in this town, a cynical one. There's cynicism and skepticism about whether the feds will charge any of the public officials that had a hand in this whole misbegotten endeavor. And there's a perception that the U.S. attorneys in Florida in this circuit show more zeal in going after African Americans and Democrats who play around with public money, for example, than they might against white conservative office holders. Now, we'll have to see what happens with the grand jury, but what about that perception?
I mean, I agree that the perception is there, and I agree that I think a lack of action on JEA will add to that perception. The federal grand jury, that investigation is still ongoing as far as I can tell. The feds take a long time. I mean, this is just a part of the process. There's just nothing that seems to happen quickly in that system, and so I don't know what they will ultimately do. They have, as your listeners may recall from different shows in the past, I mean, they have called a number of witnesses to talk to the grand jury. They seemed to have been building toward a pretty specific case against some of the high-level JEA executives, or maybe just one. And so, I mean, it would be at this kind of late stage to go through all of that. It would be surprising to me if nothing happened, but not outside the realm of possibility. And yeah, I mean, I think, the Middle District of Florida has gone after corrupt officials. In Jacksonville, they have all been black Democrats. And I can understand why people will feel cynically about the Justice Department's, decision to do nothing if that's where we end up.
Dave tweets the show, the connection between Florida Power and Light and sham candidates may be that they wanted to control the Florida Senate in order to confirm appointments to the Public Service Commission. If Florida Power and Light had bought JEA, there'd be one less competing utility in the state to set rates. He says, it's 5492937. Wayne in Jacksonville. Hi, Wayne. You're on the air.
Hi. I would just like to state that Nate is absolutely correct. A lot more can happen that is legal, and it is very difficult to establish burden in order to facilitate these indictments all the way to convictions. And that is probably what extends these investigations. All of my forensic work, requires significant peer review and evidentiary support prior to it being used. And I suspect those things are happening. It is also true of the money. A lot of money can flow that we might think is shady, but is legal. And so there's some foundational issues that need to be reviewed. Finally, JEA, I do not believe is governed by the PSC. So, however, I do believe that Florida Power and Light definitely works to influence the Senate confirmation to the PSC and the PSC itself, both in support of governing candidates and Senate candidates. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Okay, a lot in Wayne's call. Let me begin by that last point he made about whether the PSC oversees JEA. Nate.
They do not set JEA's rates. I mean, there are things that, they do have some oversight JEA, but rates are not one.
Okay. And then, his observations, I think, are in line with what you've been saying overall about this issue. Let's go to Shane in Mandarin. Hi, Shane. Go ahead.
Hey, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for calling.
Hey, I listen to you all the time, and I appreciate the service that you provide, to get the public awareness out about, particular community concerns. But, this whole JEA thing, in my memory, because this has been going on for a couple of years, it seems like their plan to sell JEA was based on the financial viability of them continuing in the normal course of business that they've always been on. In other words, if we don't sell it, we're going to lose,
Yeah.
But now they're building this glass edifice for a new headquarters downtown right next to the courthouse. And I'm like, I thought you guys were supposedly going broke or something,
Well, that was certainly the narrative that the former CEO, Aaron Zahn, tried to lay down.
I listened to the show today because I hope one of them indictments is for Lenny Curry. If he says he doesn't know nothing about that dark money and what was really going on, he's a liar.
All right, Shane, thanks. Nate, that's the $64,000 question. Will anyone at City Hall face any legal exposure for any alleged involvement they had in trying to privatize JEA? Or if indictments come down, will they mainly be limited to former employees of the utility, like former CEO Aaron Zahn, who was saying things that the utility was in a death spiral, that it needed to sell because it was the only way for it to survive? Those statements were later shown to be false. The PUP, it was called, the attempt to put out a performance unit plan to enrich senior employees at JEA to the tune of many millions of dollars. Will the indictments be limited, if they are handed down, to just that aspect of the sale? I think that's what we're all waiting to see.
Sure. I mean, nobody knows. What we have been able to report on the investigation is a really limited view into what the feds are doing. However, all of that information that we have seen thus far points to a more narrow case that I think focuses on former JEA employees rather than this kind of sprawling going into City Hall type investigation. We don't know that for sure, but what we have seen, the witnesses that have been called, some of the information in a subpoena that the feds issued to JEA, I think points more toward a narrow case.
Lawrence tweets the show, "It's crazy to think sunshine laws let us know what our elected officials are doing, but they don't let us know who they're doing it for." I think that sums up the state of affairs in Florida, where we do have strong sunshine laws. But at the same time, the corrupting influence of dark money in our politics has almost made a mockery of those robust sunshine laws. And it takes the kind of reporting that we see this week in the Times-Union and the Orlando Sentinel to even try to piece together what really is going on behind the scenes, Nate. The Orlando Sentinel was only able to report this out along with your work because someone anonymously gave them some documents. Isn't that right?
Not only that someone anonymously gave them documents, but gave them very secretive internal corporate records that were never intended to see the light of day. I mean, this is stuff that is what makes all of this so difficult. I mean, that City Council investigative committee had the power to issue subpoenas and did issue subpoenas, and all of this stuff, not a word of any of it had been public knowledge before. I mean, that's how difficult it is to ferret it out if you just don't happen to know. And the Sentinel has done, even before they looped us in on some of the JEA thread, they did a really masterful job reporting out, corroborating a lot of details in these documents and making sense of them, because they're not all the easiest to read and understand. There's financial ledgers and copies of checks, and it took a lot of work to get these documents to a form that kind of told a story.
Now, getting back to the beginning of this discussion, as you reported, Councilmember Garrett Dennis was offered this lucrative job. He turned it down, and it wasn't until these documents came to light that he realized he was indirectly being bribed with this exciting plush job offer as a way to get him off the city council, because he would have been a complicating factor in the JEA privatization. Here's an email from a listener. "What does this all say about the other city council members? They are bought and paid for." No proof of that, but at the same time, it does raise the question, Nate, how many other council members have fielded these kinds of lucrative opportunities that may or may not be influencing their votes in one way or another?
Yeah, I mean, stories like this, and frankly, also the sorts of campaigns that are run and how they're run, I think that it breeds cynicism in the electorate. It fuels that perception, and people tune out when they believe that things are out of their control. And I think that a lot of groups that work to influence campaigns would be perfectly happy with that. So, I do agree that, this dark money issue is a destructive one in our political process.
It certainly is. And I think it just points up all the more how important independent journalism is in this state. And so I do encourage everyone to read this piece at Jacksonville.com. And there's more as well in the Orlando Sentinel. We'll have an abstract on our website about it, too, at WJCT.org. Nate Monroe, always great to get your insights. And thank you so much for being with us.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Melissa.
And much more still ahead later, how you can help the victims of deadly tornadoes in Kentucky and Tennessee. But up next.
Crowley's making this commitment because it's true to our core values and our purpose. It's a broad goal. It's a bold goal of reducing emissions across all three scopes, so scopes 1, 2, and 3. And the reason we're doing this, first and foremost, it's the right thing to do.
Jacksonville shipping giant Crowley sets an ambitious target to reach net zero carbon emissions. That's next. We'll be right back.
The Jacksonville Music Experience from WJCT Public Media is your ticket to the local scene. Music reviews, curated playlists, music history, concert recommendations, profiles of local artists, and more. Turn your ear on the beautiful noise emerging from Northeast Florida and learn more about the local artist whose music is reverberating across the country. Visit jacksmusic.org to play it local and play it loud.
The latest wellness trends, helpful or harmful? I'm Dr. Joe Servin. Join me Saturday at 4 for What's Health Got to Do with It? Only on WJCT News 89.9.
Today's segment of Going Green is sponsored in part by North Florida Land Trust.
Welcome back. Well, Jacksonville shipping giant Crowley has made a big announcement. They've committed to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050. The company says it's pursuing a path aligned with the latest climate science that aims to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, to reach this target, Crowley estimates it will reduce overall emissions by 4.2 million metric tons of greenhouse gases every year. That's the equivalent of removing more than 900,000 cars off the road each year. For more, I spoke with Elisa Praskovich, Vice President of Sustainability at Crowley. It's today's Going Green.
Elisa, it's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here with you today, Melissa.
This is a big announcement from Crowley, setting a very ambitious goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions across all sections of your company. Now, you do have some time to do it. You've set the target year of 2050. Can you explain why Crowley decided to make this commitment?
Crowley is making this commitment because it's true to our core values and our purpose. It's a broad goal. It's a bold goal of reducing emissions across all three scopes, so scopes 1, 2, and 3. And the reason we're doing this, first and foremost, it's the right thing to do. And second, we believe that we would have the partnerships, the collaboration, and the innovation that will enable us to be successful in our bold goal to reduce emissions across all three scopes to zero by 2050.
And when you say all scopes 1, 2, and 3, what does that mean?
So scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions is how the international community buckets emissions into three different categories. Scope 1 emissions are those that companies own and manage. So, for instance, fuel that's burned on our ships or fuel that's burned in our trucks. Scope 2 emissions are all related to our buildings and our facilities, so think utilities. Scope 3 emissions are effectively everything else that represents our value chain, our vendors, our consultants, as well as travel from our employees. So it's a very broad emission Scope 3 that we do not have direct control over.
I see. Now, to reach this target, you estimate Crowley will be reducing all of your emissions by more than 4 million metric tons of greenhouse gases every year. That's like taking almost 1 million cars off the road every year. So this is a big chunk for a major shipping company here in our region. This sounds hard, though. If this were easy, we would have already done all this, right? What are the biggest challenges to doing this? How are you beginning to go about this?
The biggest challenge is making sure that we build the partnerships and we leverage the technology that's out there to help us get to that goal, especially as it regards Scope 3 or the hardest emissions to abate. The good news on Scope 3 emissions is not only Crowley working on this, but each of our key partners, our customers, et cetera, are all working really hard on their Scope 3 emission reductions as well. So under the premise of rising tide lifts all boats, we are hopeful that in partnership with our customers, IT solutions, tools of the future, that will be successful reducing emissions to those targets across all three scopes.
So give me an example, if you could. Are you going to an all-electric or alternative energy fleet? Are you going to change the way you logistically run your day-to-day business? This just seems like an enormous undertaking. Can you give me some specifics on how your business will change?
Sure, happy to give you some specifics. So let's look at our tug fleet, for instance. On the West Coast, we have escort tugs that help bring larger ships in and out of port safely. In order to achieve our emission reduction targets, we're currently building the first ever U.S. electric tug that is a zero-emission tug. So as we look to replace aging tugs on the West Coast, for instance, electric or alternative energy source tugs are the first choice or the first look for Crowley. In addition, for our existing vessels that operate, how can we leverage alternative energies that are currently available on the market, such as biofuels or renewable natural gas is another example, so that where we can't retire assets or retire certain equipment, we can certainly look at alternative fuels to reduce emissions on those assets, which is why, for example, a few of our vessels are already using drop-in biofuels to help offset some of the carbon emissions today.
I see. Now, the target is 2050. What's your response to environmental and climate activists who have been pressuring corporate America to decarbonize even sooner than that? They say we can't wait that long to sequester carbon out of the air and to make this kind of transition.
We understand that the pressure and the requirement here to do things right, to do things with integrity, and do them in a very transparent way. And this is precisely why we're using the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is an industry standard for validating companies' methodologies to reduce emissions, where a third party comes in and looks at Crowley's methodologies to reduce emissions across all three scopes, and make sure that the methodologies that we're submitting are aligned with science-based targets that support reducing the global temperature, keeping the global temperature from 1.5 degrees Celsius or below. So to simplify, we will be very transparent, and we'll make sure we're doing this with integrity as we set forward on our 2050 goal, leveraging the third-party validation of the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which we're currently working on submitting our emissions reduction methodologies to them as we speak.
Right, but we're talking about a 30-year window. Would it be possible to get to this goal before the year 2050?
It's more than possible to get to that goal, and we're also hopeful that we will as well. And this is why leveraging the third-party validation of Science-Based Target Initiative, there are key check-ins along the way. Every 10 years, the parties have to sit down and make sure that we are on target to either meeting or exceeding our goals. So we're holding ourselves accountable to make sure that on our way to zero, we're doing these check-ins every 10 years at a minimum to make sure that we are tracking towards that ambitious goal for all three scopes by 2050.
Thanks so much for joining us, Elisa Praskovich, VP of Sustainability at Jacksonville-based Crowley, a maritime transport leader in this country, going carbon neutral. Thanks so much, Elisa.
You bet. Take care. Pleasure to be with you.
Well, tornadoes devastated Tennessee and Kentucky last week, killing dozens of people and leaving many more homeless and injured. It was a rare December tornado outbreak in that part of the country. Getting back to what we were just talking about with Crowley and reducing carbon emissions, experts say climate change is loading the dice for severe storms like these tornadoes by creating the right environments and atmospheric conditions. So this gives you an idea of the havoc climate change is already wreaking in this country right now. Now, here's some good news. The Red Cross wasted no time sending aid to those affected, and they are encouraging anyone who can to donate their time and resources to help out. We spoke with Jack Morgan. He's the interim regional executive director of the Red Cross.
Continue to deploy people from the Jacksonville and North Florida region
We have an individual, John Gilman, headed to Tennessee this afternoon to help support feeding operations. We sent somebody in public affairs out of our Pensacola office up to Kentucky. We are continuing to recruit volunteers and staff around the clock to help support the tornadoes in the four-state quad area, and we will continue to do that until we have all the support needed to support the devastation from the tornadoes. Can do a couple of different things. If they would like to volunteer, they can go to what's called redcross.org, and there's a section for volunteers, and they can welcome to go there and log on and see the opportunities there. Always financial assistance is needed as we're supporting both sheltering, feeding, and providing financial assistance across the four-state area up there. So if someone wanted to donate, that also is redcross.org, and they can go on that website page and electronically donate right there.
Again, you can donate at redcross.org, or you can call 1-800-RED-CROSS. You can text your donation. Text Red Cross to 90999. Okay, there's another way you can help by giving blood. Susan Forbes, the Senior Vice President of Public Relations at OneBlood here in our area, wants folks to know that the best time to give blood is before disaster ever strikes.
At this time, OneBlood has not been asked to send additional blood to the impacted areas, but it's important that people remember the need for a ready blood supply at all times. And when we see these tragedies like this happening, all too often the blood supply is playing a role in helping the people who are injured in these catastrophic events. And it's the blood that's already available that's going to be used first to help these patients. And it's why blood donation needs to be a proactive event that people do. By donating each and every time you're eligible, you are helping ensure a ready blood supply for your community. And it just is such an extraordinary act that people can do and help in such a profound way. And, you know, by donating when you're eligible, it ensures that ready supply. We encourage people, don't wait for a tragedy to become the blood donor. By being proactive and donating each time you're eligible, you're helping save lives when and where that blood is needed. So I can't stress enough how important it is to make blood donation a habit.
Easy to do, too. There are donation centers all over town. You can go through OneBlood's website and go donate some blood. Now, again, just to reiterate, this is one of the costliest tornado events in American history. 8 states were impacted. The death toll is over 70, with another 100-plus people still accounted for. Fatalities in Illinois, Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri, and more. The National Weather Service, when it looks at the strength of these storms, they are truly unprecedented. The path of destruction that we saw across this middle part of the country. And so this, again, is more evidence that a warming planet is causing extreme weather conditions that result in loss of life. It's a reiteration of our commitment here on this program to highlight ways companies and individuals and governments are working to not only reduce emissions, but find other ways to mitigate and adapt to the new reality of climate change in our world today. Okay, a quick break, and in a moment, we'll lighten things up a bit. It's our monthly book club. We'll tell you what we're reading this month as Stacey Goldring joins the show. We'll be right back.
Lee & Kate's Glass, family owned and operated for 95 years. Lee & Kate's Glass is your source for upgrading your home's glass, from shower doors and mirrors to windows and tabletops. Learn more at leeandkatesglass.com. Northern Trust Wealth Management. Northern Trust has been helping Florida families grow their wealth for 50 years. And with 20 locations across the state, Northern Trust expertise is always close at hand.
I'm Lisa Mullins. More than 170,000 children in the U.S. have lost a parent or guardian to COVID.
Somebody asked me, it was like, how are you dealing with your grandpa's death? Like I say, when I go to school, I have a smile on my face, but that doesn't mean I'm happy.
Children and grief, next time on Here and Now.
Today at 2 on WJCT News 89.9.
On the next Fresh Air, writer Grace M. Cho talks about her Korean mother who married an American and immigrated to the U.S. in 1972. She would eventually be diagnosed with schizophrenia. Cho believes the trauma her mother experienced during and after the Korean War contributed to her mental illness. Cho's new memoir is called Tastes Like War. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
It can be easy to lose faith in the fight against climate change, but environmentalist Jane Goodall has spent decades in the movement, and she says staying hopeful isn't just a slogan, it's a necessity. We'll ask her how she keeps the faith, plus we get the latest on the ground in Kentucky. Next time on 1A.
Today starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Finally, this hour, you know what's always a great gift to put under the tree for someone you love? A new book. It's this month's book club on the show. Our leader, Stacy Goldring, has a new recommendation for December, Ghost Forest by Peek Shiwan Fong. Stacy, good morning.
Good morning, Melissa.
And good to speak with you. Okay, tell us about Ghost Forest and why this book caught your eye.
Well, this is one of those books, Melissa, where I'm so glad I'm in a book club because I never would have read it without someone recommending it. This is a wonderful book, like you said, for a Christmas gift, and it will also fit beautifully in a stocking. It's a slim novel, but it is packed with story. So I don't know if you probably remember, but back in 97, the UK ceded control to Hong Kong to the Chinese government, and that ended 156 years of British rule. Now, what does that do to you if you're living there in a family? Well, Ghost Forest is set in this context. We have a family that decides strategically to move from Hong Kong to Vancouver because they were fearful of what was going to happen. And this was something that did happen. Over 1 million people left Hong Kong in the late 80s and early 90s because they were worried. So we get to hear
and not to cut you off. Not to cut you off. They had good reason to worry, as we've been seeing in recent years, right?
Oh yeah.
As Hong Kong has fallen into authoritarian hands. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So we get to feel how this happens to a family through the voice of a young protagonist whose name we don't know. But it's a young girl whose family decides to move. The father stays in Hong Kong, and the family moves, the mom, the sister, and our protagonist move to Vancouver. Okay, so what happens when your family lives across an ocean? Right? It is a story that relates to anyone who has had to live with a single parent or is not sure of your sense of home or identity, because where do you actually live? Where is home? So it reflects on a complex migration experience that truly, Melissa, is universal. And what we learn about is something called astronaut families. So astronaut families was a term coined when this started happening because the breadwinner lives in one place and the rest of the family lives somewhere else. And usually it was the father who would go abroad and then the rest of the family would stay in Hong Kong. But in this case, the father decides after they see that things aren't as bad as they thought, realize this is the late 90s, early 2000s, the father moves back to Hong Kong, so the kids are growing up as Vancouverites. They're Canadian, but yet they have to go visit their dad, who was brought up in a very different culture. So it really is an interesting book because not only is it written, I'm not sure of her own idea, speaking from a nation perspective, it's also written, Melissa, by an artist. The book is artistic on every page because she writes the book in the style of what is, I'm going to botch up the word, but it is called Shi'ai, which means with a single line, you can paint an ocean, meaning on each page, the lack of words also means something. It is the voids. It is the things we don't know that are also part of the story. So everything she doesn't know about her father, everything she doesn't know about her Chinese heritage is also a part of the story. And on some passages, Melissa, when you page through the book, you actually see the words falling off the page. So it's written by an author. It is considered auto-fictional because she did experience this, our author, but it is indeed a novel. And I was so inspired by this book, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to have a writing workshop based on this book, particularly if there were any artists who wanted to try their pen with the written word. So I'm putting a call out to artists out there if they're interested in doing a writing workshop or anyone interested in doing a writing workshop based on the books we read in our book club. I am totally game.
How
and
cool.
Of course, they can reach so they can reach me, at the address here at the station, book club at WJCT.
Mm-hmm. Email Stacy at bookclub@wjct.org.
Right.
Now, they can also listen into your online virtual book club discussion.
Yes, we'll be meeting in an hour.
In 1 hour.
Yeah. So just go to chapterandnotes.com and sign up and join us. And, of course, we'll be going back into in-person at San Marco Books and More in February, so you can sign up that way, too. So all kinds of different ways to come together as a community through the joy of reading.
chapterandnotes.com. Join in today at 11 for Stacy's Book Club. Virtual this month, but as she said, they're going back to in-person meets next year at San Marco Books and More, which is great news. This month's book is Ghost Forest. Stacy Goldring, have a great holiday, and thanks for sharing the joy of reading with us.
Thank you. Happy and healthy 2022.
Let's hope so. And that's our show. Thanks for listening. Thanks to our entire show production team and all of you, the listeners out there. We appreciate all of your feedback. Keep the emails coming to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. I'm Melissa Ross. We'll be right back here again at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Have a great Tuesday.
Support for First Coast